Today, we're going to follow the incredible story of one professor. It's a journey that starts from a place of deep personal crisis, takes him all the way to the historic halls of Oxford University, and lands him right in the middle of a debate about the biggest questions of our time: faith, artificial intelligence, and the future of education itself. And it all really comes down to this single verse. You see, for Professor Obari, these weren't just words on a page. This was the moment that completely turned his life around, pulling him back from the absolute brink and setting him on a path he never could have imagined.
So, to really get a handle on his work, we have to start with the man himself. And that story, well, it begins with a personal crisis so profound it almost ended his journey before it even got started. Growing up in rural Japan, his whole life was about baseball, not his schoolwork. And this led to him failing in his studies, feeling this crushing anxiety about the future, and it all spiraled into a period of such deep anguish that he found himself in total despair. He decided he needed a fresh start, so he went to study at a university in the United States. But soon enough, that same academic pressure started building up all over again, and he was right on the verge of quitting. It was right then, alone in his dorm room reading the Bible, that he had this spiritual encounter that just lit a fire inside him, a powerful new sense of purpose. Now, what's really amazing about this is just how fast everything changed for him. I mean, look at this timeline. After that spiritual rebirth in 1976, his academic life just takes off. He graduates college early, earns degrees from some of the best institutions in the world. It was a complete 180. And this new path would eventually lead him not once, but three separate times to a place he calls his sacred space for thinking and reflection, the one and only University of Oxford. And this just perfectly captures the huge shift he saw. His first visit back in 1989, it was all about centuries-old tradition. You know, that quiet reverence you feel in ancient libraries? But wow, by his last visit in 2020, the campus was buzzing with debates about AI, and then suddenly the pandemic forced this massive worldwide experiment in online learning. So you can imagine, this collision of ancient tradition and super futuristic technology at Oxford really forced him to wrestle with one of the central tensions of our modern world: that complex relationship between science, our faith, and artificial intelligence.
And he saw this tension perfectly embodied in two of Oxford's most famous thinkers. On one side, you've got Richard Dawkins, who looks at the world through a purely scientific materialist lens. And on the other, you have C.S. Lewis, who actually started out as an atheist, but came to believe that a Christian worldview gave him answers to life's deepest questions that science just couldn't touch. This whole clash of worldviews led him to what Oxford mathematician John Lennox calls the big questions. And the first one is the most fundamental of all. Where do we come from? You know, science points to the Big Bang and evolution, while faith traditions talk about a creator. It's the foundational question that really shapes everything else. So, if that's the origin question, the second one is all about purpose. What are we actually here for? Is our existence just about biology, surviving and reproducing? Or are we guided by some kind of higher calling, a purpose that goes way beyond our material existence? And finally, the third question takes it even further, beyond purpose to ultimate meaning. If we do have a purpose, what does it all add up to? And this is really where science kind of hits a wall, because that question of ultimate meaning pushes us right into the realm of philosophy and theology. For Professor Obari, the key point in this whole AI debate was summed up perfectly by an Oxford computer science expert. Professor Tarasenko's statement basically draws a line in the sand, arguing that human consciousness has a divine spark that an algorithm, no matter how smart it gets, can never, ever replicate. Okay, so what does all of this deep thinking mean for the next generation? Well, this whole journey of faith and intellect led Professor Obari to develop a really clear, actionable plan for education in the age of AI. So his big idea is this: it's not enough anymore to just have specialized knowledge. To really thrive, students need a foundation built on these four pillars. You need the practical skills of language and technology, but you have to combine them with the deep, grounding force of a coherent worldview to guide all your decisions. And you know what? It really seems to be working. He surveyed 138 of his students and asked them if his worldview-focused classes helped them think more deeply. And just look at these numbers. The results are pretty overwhelming. Almost 88% either agreed or strongly agreed. That's huge. And this all leads up to a challenge that goes way beyond the classroom.
It's really a challenge for each and every one of us to stop and consciously think about the vision that's guiding our own lives. Professor Kobari lays out two fundamentally different paths. The first is self-realization, where success is like climbing a ladder. It's defined by what society says is important, like wealth and achievement, and it's often full of competition. The second path is God realization, which isn't about climbing at all, but about walking a path, reorienting your life around a divine purpose and finding your fulfillment by serving other people. And he points out that this idea isn't some new thing. In fact, it's literally embedded right into the motto of Oxford itself. The Lord is my light. It's this powerful reminder that for centuries, the whole point of seeking knowledge was seen as a way of finding a deeper, transcendent truth. And so we end right where we started, with a choice. Professor Kobari's journey shows us two very different maps for life. One is drawn by the self, the other by a higher power. It leaves us with a critical question for our time. In a world that's being shaped more and more by artificial intelligence, what is the source of your light? Which vision is guiding you?
You ever find yourself just lying awake at night, thinking about the big questions, the really big ones? It's something we all do. Well, today, we're going to dive into those questions, but we're going to do it by following one man's incredible, lifelong search for answers. So let's just start with the big three, right? These are the questions that the famous Oxford mathematician John C. Lennox talks about all the time. Where do we come from? What are we even here for? And, what's the whole point of it all? These questions are what drive everything: science, philosophy, our own beliefs, and they are right at the core of the story we're exploring today. And our guide for this whole thing is Professor Kaishi Kobari. His story, it's not just some dry academic paper, it's a really personal journey, one that took him from total despair all the way to the famous halls of Oxford University, all in this search for real meaning. And the wild thing is, the key to his entire story is hidden right in plain sight. It's the motto of Oxford University itself, Dominus Illuminatio Mea. It means, the Lord is my light. And that one phrase, believe it or not, connects everything: his personal struggles, his work, and his ideas for the future.
But before he could find that light, Professor Kobari had to go through some serious darkness. As a young man, he was just completely overwhelmed by anxiety, by despair, and it led him to a breaking point. But that wasn't the end of his story. It was actually the beginning of a desperate search for something, anything, to believe in.
And in 1976, he found it. In his dorm room, he stumbled upon a Bible verse that didn't just give him hope, it offered him a total do-over. This idea of becoming a new creation, it was like a switch flipped. It gave him a new purpose and put him on this amazing path from a student who had lost all hope to a really respected academic.
So where did that path lead him? Well, it took him back, again and again, to the University of Oxford. His relationship with that place spanned 30 years, and it wasn't just one long visit. It was more like an intellectual pilgrimage that happened in three very different, very transformative eras.
Okay, so his journey unfolded in these three acts. First, back in '89, he gets what he calls a baptism of tradition, just soaking in centuries of knowledge. Then he comes back in 2007, right when digitalization is taking off, to see how this ancient school is dealing with all this new tech. And his last trip, from 2018 to 2020, wow, he's there for the dawn of the AI revolution and the start of the pandemic, forcing him to rethink what education even means. And through all of these visits, Professor Kobari found himself right in the middle of a huge intellectual fight, a battle of worldviews that's been going on inside Oxford for a long, long time. And you can see this whole debate perfectly in two of Oxford's biggest names. On one side, you have Richard Dawkins, who basically says science has all the answers. But on the other side, you have C.S. Lewis, who started as an atheist, but came to believe that you absolutely need faith to understand the world. This was the massive tension Professor Kobari had to figure out. Can faith and science really work together? And this whole thing just came to a head in 2019. Professor Kobari is at this conference, and he stands up and asks the head of computer science a question we're all kind of wondering about. Is AI ever going to be truly human? The answer he got, it was not what you'd expect. Professor Tarasenko, a top AI guy, didn't give him a technical answer. He gave him a theological one. He said the real difference is that divine spark that humans have. And for Kobari, this was a huge aha moment. Here's a leading scientist at Oxford, and his faith and his science are just completely intertwined.
This was it. This was the big idea Professor Kobari had been looking for. He realized that education shouldn't be about choosing between tradition and technology, or faith and science. The goal should be to blend them all together to create a totally new way of teaching.
And he found the perfect model for this in a concept called Bloom's taxonomy. Think of it like a pyramid. At the bottom, you have the basics, like remembering facts. But the real goal, the whole point of learning, is to climb all the way to the top, to analyzing, evaluating, and ultimately creating something new yourself.
What Professor Kobari realized was that so much of education, especially in his home country of Japan, is stuck at the bottom of that pyramid. It's all about memorizing. So his mission became clear: shift the focus to the top. Let's develop the skills that AI can't just do for us: critical thinking, creativity, the stuff we actually need for the 21st century.
And listen, this wasn't just some theory he wrote down. He put it into practice. He invited American missionaries from Campus Crusade into his English classes. Now, the goal wasn't to convert anyone. It was to challenge his students, to get them talking, to expose them to completely different ways of thinking, and to get them to really examine what they themselves believe.
So, did it actually work? Oh yeah, the results were pretty amazing. He surveyed 138 of his students, and almost 88% of them said the class actually changed their worldview and made them think on a deeper level. That is a huge validation of his whole idea. So, where does this all lead? Well, Professor Kobari's entire journey comes together in this really powerful vision for the future of education, one that takes all the lessons from the past to get our students ready for the future.
There's this quote from the philosopher John Dewey that just nails it. If we teach today as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow. That really captures the urgency here. The world is changing so fast, we can't just keep doing things the old way. It's just not fair to the next generation.
At the end of the day, he says the choice we all have really comes down to two paths. On one hand, you've got self-realization. That's the endless competition for success as society defines it, which, let's be honest, usually leads to a lot of stress and comparing yourself to others. On the other hand, there's God realization, which is all about finding a purpose that's given to you, and that leads to inner peace and a life of service.
And this brings us right back to Oxford. For Professor Kobari, the real magic of that place wasn't a battle between faith and reason. It was the fusion of the two. It's this pretty radical idea that you can hold on to a deep, absolute truth and still engage with the messy, changing relative world of academic thought.
Professor Kobari's whole journey began in darkness until he found his light, his Dominus Illuminatio Mea. He found it in his faith, in his work, and in a mission to change education. So the final question I want to leave you with is this: what's your light? What's the thing that guides you and gives your life meaning?
Let's dive into the incredible story of Professor Obari. It's a journey from personal despair to academic heights. It all kicks off at Oxford with its motto, "The Lord is my light," a phrase that really guided his life. Professor Obari's journey started in a pretty tough place, with academic struggles and deep personal despair. Overwhelmed with anxiety, his path led straight to a moment of total crisis.
Then, in 1976, while studying in America, he hit a turning point. A single passage from the Bible changed everything.
This one verse sparked a spiritual awakening, giving him a new purpose and a totally fresh start. This new path led him straight back to academia and a long relationship with Oxford University. What's really interesting is how his focus evolved over time, mirroring the changing world around him. At Oxford, his research got personal. He started exploring science and faith, tackling life's big questions. He dove into the clash of worldviews, like the famous debate between Richard Dawkins and C.S. Lewis. As AI developed, a new question came up. Can a machine truly become human? And the answer he got from a top AI expert was profound, pointing to what really makes us unique.
So, this all leads to a crucial question. How do you prepare students for a future dominated by AI?
He came up with 4 key skills students need to thrive in our complex, globalized world. His classes weren't just boring lectures. They were lively debates with international guest speakers and missionaries.
But did this approach actually work? Did it really change how students think? He surveyed them to find out. The results? Well, they speak for themselves. An overwhelming majority felt a profound change in their perspective.
Check out this number, a whopping 88%. That's how many students agreed their worldview was expanded.
Students went from being anxious about speaking English to confidently expressing their own core beliefs.
Ultimately, his story challenges all of us to think about the big questions that define our humanity.